Hello, my name is Kays and welcome to another episode of Kays Labs. This one is a bit different. I'm going to talk about the Sequential Circuits Prophet 2000 that I've owned since the mid-80s when it first came out. So sequential circuits, known mostly for analog synthesizers like the Prophet 5 and the Prophet 10 and all those other wonderful analog synths that they came up with in the late 70s and early 80s. The Prophet 2000 is a sampler. This was Sequential Circuits' first kind of toe dipping into digital sampling, and it's a 12-bit sampler, and it's got like 8-voice polyphony. But what makes it particularly interesting is the fact that the entire filtering and VCAs and envelopes are all analog. So you got like this really wonderfully analog kind of warm sound with the ability of creating your own samples. The reason why you haven't heard me talk about the Prophet 2000 before is because, knock on wood and keeping my fingers firmly crossed, I haven't had any issues with it. However, this was not always the case, and back in the mid-90s I actually had like a real big problem with my Prophet 2000, in the sense that when I went to play back the samples, everything sounded really crackly and distorted, and it was not usable at all, and it was a big problem, I remember. And the other big problem was the fact that Sequential Circuits as a company no longer existed. They went out of business, I believe, like in the late 80s or early 90s. So this wasn't a case where I could go and bring it to where I bought it from or some other authorized sequential circuit repair place, because they just simply didn't exist. However, some of the engineers from Sequential Circuits went on to form their own company called Wine Country, and they basically offered some replacement parts for all the Sequential Circuits synthesizers, as well as documentation and other miscellaneous kind of like service and maintenance type of things. And one of the things that they did have, I remember, was this diagnostic disc for the Prophet 2000. The idea was that you inserted the disc, booted up the Prophet 2000, and instead of containing samples, it contained some sort of internal code where you could kind of run a bunch of diagnostic tests and trying to pinpoint a little bit what was not working with it. And I picked one up from them, and I ran the diagnostic test, and lo and behold, it turned out that some of my RAM chips had gone bad. So I was able to replace the RAM chips and get my Prophet 2000 to once again sound perfect. So it was definitely worth, I don't know, probably like the $30 or so that I spent on the disc back then. Fast forward to last year, when some people kind of started asking about this disc online. Some people mentioned this disc that went by the mysterious code name as Model 879. I don't know what that means, but that's what Sequential referred to it internally. And a lot of people even said, this thing is a myth. It doesn't exist. It never existed, And I raised my hand. I was like, no. It existed. I used to own one. Unfortunately, because it's been like 30 years and I moved back and forth, I did not know where this disc had ended up. So I set out to contact Wine Country, because they're still around, and I asked them if they had a copy of this diagnostic disc, and they said no, they no longer have it. It's like, okay, that's a problem if the very engineers from Sequential Circuits don't have it. So then, through a good friend of mine, I was put in contact with none other than the legendary Chris Meyer. Now, for those of you that don't know who Chris Meyer is, he is legendary engineer from Sequential Circuits, and he actually designed and co-created the Prophet 2000, and I believe he was also involved in the also legendary Prophet VS. So I contacted Chris, who was like super nice and super kind, and I said, hey, if anybody would know about this disc, it would be you, right? And he knew about the disc, he just didn't have it, and and he didn't even know like where I could go to try to get my hands on it. So I gave up hope, and I was like, okay, this kind of stinks. And I was like, oh, I guess one of those things that is lost in the dust of history. Until when I was doing a little bit of house cleaning, and I came across these old boxes, and I was like, what is in there? And lo and behold, what I found inside this old box is my original Prophet 2000 manual. Okay, and I figure, okay, if this disc is anywhere, it's gotta be here. Ta-da! Okay, so I found it. So this is model 879, the famous diagnostic disc for the Prophet 2000, and I believe it also works on the Prophet 2002, which is the rack mount version of the sampler. So I was really happy. I immediately told everybody on the Facebook group. I was like, hey, look what I found, it does exist. But there were like two major issues with it. Issue number one is that I no longer have a floppy drive attached to my Prophet. I got one of those really cool Gotek USB thumb drive floppy emulators that works really well. I highly recommend the Gotek because it's just so much easier to manage tons and tons of discs and load them up, and you don't have to like kind of deal with like all these old technology. So I didn't really have a way to read this disc. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, of course, is the fact that I don't even know if this thing still works. I mean, it's been like 30 years, and you know, it's magnetic, it's old, and these things go bad. So I didn't know if this disc was still any good. So I reached out to a good friend of mine from Chicken Systems, which is a company that makes translation software from sampler to sampler for all these vintage samplers, along a number of other things. And the owner of Chicken System is his name is Garth, and his last name I'm going to mispronounce it. Sorry, Garth. It's I think it's pronounced Hjelte. Anyway, Garth was really kind enough to say, hey, why don't you ship me the disc and let me take a look at it and see if I can actually image it. So I shipped him the disc, and he received it, and he ran it through all his bag of tricks, and he's like, I can't get a solid reading from this disc. So it's very likely that the disc is no longer working, it's corrupted, it's messed up, and you know, you're SOL. So Garth sent me the disc back. And then I had a thought. Even though I no longer have the floppy drive for the Prophet 2000, I do have a floppy drive from my Korg DSS-1 that still worked with the Korg DSS-1, and I thought, okay, maybe it's possible that this floppy drive might actually work in the Prophet, so let me try that. So what I did is I put the floppy drive from the Korg DSS-1 into the Prophet, and I loaded up some of my sample discs that I still have, and sure enough, it worked, and it was loading up the disc. So then came the time to actually try the diagnostic disc. So I inserted this, I booted it up, and lo and behold, it actually worked. So I contacted Garth, and Garth said, well, you know, it's possible that it might have like some different type of formatting, and that's why he was unable to read it. However, this other guy from Australia named Chris King, who is also part of the Prophet 2000 group, said, hey, there's this guy, once again I'm going to mispronounce his last name terribly. I think it's pronounced, his first name is Nick, I think his last name is pronounced Dines, so I hope I got it right. Sorry, Nick, if I didn't. So I brought the disc to Nick, and Nick was actually able to image it, to convert it into a format that then I could use on my Gotek on the thumb drive, and we tested it with my Prophet, and it worked. And it went into diagnostic mode, so I was really, really happy about it. And so I'm very, very grateful to all of these guys that came together to make this a reality. And at the end of the video, I'm going to post a link to the Google Drive with the image of this disc, so you can all have it for free, no charge. But before I do that, there's another component to this diagnostic disc that you need, which is how to operate it, because when you first insert it, it's kind of cryptic. So I thought that what I would do in this video is show you how to use the disc and all of the different diagnostic tests that you can do for your Prophet 2000. So let's find out how to use and operate this incredibly rare sequential circuit model 879 diagnostic disc for the Prophet 2000. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is download this Prophet 2000 diagnostic disc zip file, and we're just going to unzip it, and that's going to yield this Prophet 2000 diagnostic.hfe file that we want to copy onto the thumb drive that we're using with the GoTech. In this case, I already copied it and put it right here. Okay, so for the next step, we want to turn on the Prophet 2000, but don't have the thumb drive in here yet because we don't want it to kind of auto load on us quite yet. So I'm just going to insert the thumb drive in here, and now all of a sudden I'm going to have access to all of my disk image in here. And what I want to do is I want to navigate to that Prophet 2000 diagnostic disk, which is this image right here. And I want to make sure that the GoTech is set to this, because now what I want to do is turn off the Prophet and then turn it back on. And what's going to happen is that the Prophet is going to see this disk image and it's going to auto boot, and that's exactly what we want it to happen. We want to auto boot from the diagnostic disk image. Okay, so I'm just gonna switch the Prophet off, and now when I turn it back on, we should go into auto boot mode, and it should be loading up the disk image that is the diagnostic disk. And if it did that correctly, then on the main display we should see this really funky looking, I guess it looks like PP or question marks, I don't know. And also, if you don't do anything, you'll notice that what happens is that every 10 seconds or so, it will cycle through this routine, which is it's basically kind of like running through all the LEDs of the Prophet and then running through all the segments of the display, and that's basically perfectly normal. So like if you're seeing this symbol and every few seconds or so is doing this kind of weird blinking of the LEDs and this stuff, then it's working and you're in good shape. There are a couple of other things that we want to do before we start the tests, and one of it is to turn the volume all the way down. Don't worry about it in the sense that the volume is going to be controlled internally, so you're still going to be able to hear the sound where it's needed, but we're just going to turn this all the way down. And the other thing that we want to do is to make sure that the pedal is plugged into not the alternate release but the aux input right here. So I don't know if you can kind of see, there's like an aux input, and that's where we want our pedal to be plugged in for these diagnostic tests. Okay, so now we're all set to start testing the unit with a diagnostic disc, and there are 8 different tests that we can run, and those are accessed by pressing buttons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's how you access each of the tests. So these are the tests. Button number 1 is called the counter timer test. Okay, button number 2 accesses the keyboard test. Button number 3 accesses the output filter test. Button number 4 is the DAC, and there are actually like 3 sub-tests as part of this. Then button number 5 accesses the sound RAM test. Button number 6 is the LED test. Button number 7 is the switch test. And button number 8 is the foot switch test. So those are like the 8 tests that you can access from the diagnostic disc. Okay, so the first test we're going to start is test number 1, which tests the counter timer chips on the Prophet 2000, and we're just going to press 1. And after I press 1, we should see the display tell us if the test worked or failed. So I'm just going to press 1, and it gives us a GD for good. Okay, I'm just going to do it again since it was really, really fast. Press 1, GD, that means good. So that means that the counter timer chips are working just fine in the Prophet. If we did have an issue with them, then you would have gotten like a different type of message on the display. You would have gotten a C followed by a 1, 2, or 3. So in the case when the display reads C1 or C2, chances are is that the counter chip needs to be replaced. Okay, so there's an issue with the counter chip if you get like C1 or C2. If C3 is displayed, then one of the counter chips inputs or outputs could be shorted. So if you have a short somewhere, you probably need to go and check them with the multimeter just to make sure that you're not having some sort of short either with the inputs or outputs of one of those counter timer chips. So that's test number one, and as I said, it's pretty straightforward and easy. Okay, so the second test is the keyboard test, and this is kind of cool to check out all of the sensors across the 5 octaves of the Prophet 2000. So we press 2, and this is going to switch to these 2 characters, and now when I press a key, you'll see that the note that I'm pressing is displayed, and you can kind of go in there and test each and every one of the keys. The sharp keys will have a plus next to it, and you should just kind of go chromatically and test to make sure that each one of the keys is giving you a correct response. But basically that's the keyboard test, which is test number 2. Now to exit this test, if you had like the pedal plugged into the auxiliary, all you have to do is just kind of push the pedal, and that will get us back to the main screen of the diagnostic disc. Okay, so test number 3 is the output filter test, and what this test does is that it verifies the operation of each voice's analog circuits, so basically like the analog filters, and to make sure that they're working correctly or as close to factory spec as possible. So the first thing that you need to do for this test is make sure that your Prophet is plugged in into your DAW. And right now I'm coming out of the right mono output right here, and it's going like right into my audio interface. And the next thing I've done is here in Logic, right now I'm just using like the EQ module, but mostly I'm using it as an analyzer because I want to see what frequencies are going to be displayed here. If you have another plugin that also allows you to see different frequencies, that's fine too if you want to use that. I'm just using this simply as a utility way to monitor what frequencies are going to appear here. Okay. The other thing is that the manual warns you to like maybe kind of keep or start with like a volume relatively low on your monitor system. The volume of the Prophet is turned all the way down, but keep in mind that when you're using the diagnostic disc, it's bypassing whatever value this is. So it's going to output, I guess, like at full volume regardless. But as I said, like, I mean, just kind of use your judgment, maybe start with like the volume relatively low. It's not as critical that you have like really loud volume for this test. It's more about kind of looking at that spectrum analyzer just to kind of make sure that everything's in check. So I'm just going to press 3, and you'll see right here that the display goes blank. Okay, and at first you might be thinking, okay, I'm not hearing any audio, and there's nothing here, so this test is obviously not working. But that's actually not the case, because if we go back to Logic, you're going to see right here that I actually have a waveform. The reason why we can't hear it, or at least I can't hear it, is simply because this is kind of centered around like 25 hertz or so before it kind of cuts off. And this is almost like below the human hearing range. I mean, it definitely is below my hearing range. So I can't really hear what's going on, but nonetheless, I mean, there is a signal coming out of the Prophet, and I can see it on my meter here, nice and loud. So the way this test works, or at least the way you control it, is they use like the up or down buttons to change the resonance level, okay, the filter resonance. So if you press down, you'll see like a DN, and this decreases the filter resonance, and if you press up, then you are increasing the filter resonance, okay? And then you have like buttons 1 through 8, which select the 8 voices of the Prophet. So like voice 1, voice 2, voice 3, voice 4, voice 5, voice 6, voice 7, and voice 8. So you can kind of compare and contrast. And basically the way that you run this test is ideally, I mean, I have like my Prophet kind of far away from Logic, but you know, ideally you would be like close enough that you can kind of switch the voices and keep an eye out on the little frequency display, and generally you want to make sure that they're all like in the same range. Now you're probably saying, okay, that's great, but I can't hear anything. Like, what if I just want to go by ear? Fair enough. In that case, what you want to do is press execute, and execute is going to increase the filter cutoff frequency. So that means that it's going to start ramping up in the frequency, and it's going to start getting into the audible range. So let me do that. I'm just going to do it one time, and I can see over there that the frequency is starting to increase, not that much. Let me press it again, and I'm just going to keep pressing until I start hearing some sound. Okay, so we are hearing here. I'm just gonna mute this thing. Just gonna, because we do want to hear what's going on. And now that I have, this is centered right around like 350, 400 hertz, and of course we have like some overtones here. Now I can go into the increase and decrease and change the resonance level. And this is really subtle. But most importantly, what I do want to do is switch between the voices to make sure that they're all basically similar, that they're sounding similar. Let's see. So there are like some subtle differences. I don't know if you can hear it in the video. Then at that point, it becomes like an issue of like kind of calibrating the filters internally and making sure that they do all sound the same. But nonetheless, this is kind of like a handy test because, as I say, you probably can't hear it, but there's definitely like subtle differences here going on. And once again, to exit this particular test, all we have to do is just kind of press the button, and now we're back to the question mark. All right, so test number 4, it's a bit of a funky one too. It's the DAC test, or digital to analog converter test, and it's actually 3 tests into one, and it's really kind of a little bit complicated. I'm going to try to post some documentation alongside with the disk image so that you can kind of refer to it for your own diagnostic tests. But I just want to show you like kind of the basics. So like pressing number 4 here is going to get us into the DAC test, and you're going to see number 1. And what this basically tells us is that we are in DAC test number 1, okay? And once again, you have the up and down arrows here, which you can use to change the DAC output, okay, which one sets the previous DAC bit, the increase sets the previous DAC bit, and the decrease sets the DAC output, and execute is going to select the ramp output. So if I press execute, it's going to actually result into this this ramp that you can kind of see here. Now this test is probably, rather than doing it with audio, it's probably best done with a multimeter to check the voltage values, so you can be, or an oscilloscope, so you can be like really exact. Now if you want to switch to the second test, then you would press preset, and now this changes to number 2. So now we're like in test number 2, which once again, I'm going to post the documentation for this, but but it runs another set of tests on the digital to analog converter, and to get to test number 3, of course we press preset one more time, and now this turns into a 3, and I can actually kind of hear volume coming out of my monitor. So if you have your DAW on, make sure that like your speakers are not blasted, and once again, like decrease will select the square wave of the SH outputs, and increase selects a ramp output, and execute will select test number 2, while preset will select test number 1. That doesn't make as much sense to me, but nonetheless, I will post the documentation for this kind of weird DAC test so that you can kind of dig into it and do your own research. As always, to exit the test mode of test number 4, we just press the pedal, and then gets us back to the question marks. Okay, after the weird tests, let's go to something that's a little bit more straightforward. Test number 5 is the sample RAM test, and this is a test that back in the 90s, when I bought this disc, really saved my butt because it allowed me to figure out that there was something wrong with my sample RAM. So what we're going to do is like press number 5 to access test number 5, and the display changes to RT. And for this test, we have like 4 buttons available to us, 1, 2, 3, 4. Depending on if you have like the stock memory, 256 kilobytes, in which case you have buttons 1 and 2 to run the test, or if you have the expanded memory, 512 kilobytes, in which case buttons 3 and 4 run the same tests except on the expanded memory, if that makes some sense. So test number 1 basically is going to write a pattern of bits to the sample memory, as I said, like the first 256 kilobytes, and then read it back and tell us if there are any issues. If there are no issues, we should see a GD in there, and if there are some issues, then what's going to happen is that the preset LEDs are going to light up to indicate which of the bits had an issue, 1 through 12, and the display is going to show us which IC of the memory RAM failed. Okay, so that's going to give you like a number that's going to correspond to the PCB memory chip. So hopefully that's going to allow you to diagnose which RAM chip is failing, and that's exactly how I was able to do it back in the 90s when I was having this problem. So I'm just going to press 1, and the first thing it's going to do is that it's going to write a bunch of these bits in this kind of pattern. And then what we'll see here in a little bit is that we're going to have a R for read, so it's now reading them back and kind of comparing it to make sure that the pattern matches, and if it does match, we should see a GD, which should indicate that our RAM is good. There we go. So as I said, test number 1 tests this pattern on the first 256 kilobytes, and then test number 2 inverts that pattern. And then test number 3 tests it on the additional expanded memory, on the additional 256K, and test number 4 flips that once again on the expanded memory. So this is an excellent way to test if you have any RAM issues. As always, to return back to, I guess, the main menu, if there's such a thing, we just press the pedal, and now we're back to the question marks. Okay, so moving on, test number 6 is the LED test. This is another relatively easy and straightforward one. We're going to press 6, and it's just going to run through and test all the LEDs and make sure that all the LEDs are working, including like the display LEDs. So if there's a segment that's not working or one of the LEDs is not working, then this is how you're going to figure it out, and then obviously open up the unit and replace that LED if it's not working. And of course, to exit once more, we press the pedal, and we're back to the question marks. Okay, so test number 7 is similar to the LED test, and this time it's testing the switches. So we should press 7 here. And now all of a sudden everything goes blank, but if I press the various switches, it's going to tell me which ones are working, and hopefully they all register as I'm pushing down all the preset switches and the load button, all this kind of stuff. So basically this is just testing if the actual switches work or are not working. And once again, if all the switches are responding with a proper display, then you're all good. And to exit it, we press the pedal once more, and we're back to the question marks. Okay, so the final test is test number 8, which is the foot switch test. And if we press button number 8, then we'll notice that like buttons 1 and 2 light up, okay? And the way this works is that if I press, right now I have like the auxiliary foot switch plugged in, and if I press this, then the LED number 1 should switch off. Let me see. And it does. Yeah. And same thing if I switch to the alternate release. I'm just going to unplug it and plug it into the alternate release jack, and I'm just going to use the same foot switch, and now if I push it, the LED goes off. At this point, you're probably wondering, how in the world do you exit this test? Because up until now, we've been pushing the pedal to get out of the test mode, but how do I do that? Because when I push the pedal now, it's just kind of running the test. Well, the way you do it, the way you exit this particular test is quite simply by pushing the load button. And we're back to the question marks. That's all 8 tests that are on the diagnostic disc for the Prophet 2000. Of course, after you've done all your diagnostic tests, you should kind of turn off the Prophet and then turn it back on to resume normal operation. However, before you do that, you want to make sure if you have a GoTech drive that you're not still on the diagnostic disk image, or otherwise it's just going to auto boot into the disk all over again. So just make sure before you turn it off to kind of switch this to something else. I'm just gonna put like some cellos or something like that. And also, if you did turn your volume all the way down, turn it back up so you can actually hear what you're doing, and now you're safe to turn the Prophet off, and now you can turn it back on. It will auto load whatever the preset is, in this case some cellos, and now we should be back to like a fully operational, fully working Prophet 2000. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was useful to you. Many thanks again to Garth Hjelte from Chicken Systems and Chris King that kept my feet to the fire to kind of try to get this thing done. And of course Nick Dinas, who was able to finally get it working. And as promised, here is the link where you can download the disc. And once again, thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe, or tell your friends. I'm really trying to grow this channel because of the fact that the more subscribers the channel has, the more is going to pop up when people search and are trying to kind of figure out how to repair their various synths. And I have more videos coming up, including one about the Korg DSS-1, which, just like the Prophet 2000, is also a sampler with a fully analog filtering system. So I hope that you guys are going to find that interesting, and that should be coming up in about a couple of weeks here as soon as I finish editing it. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next Case Labs video.